Hey peeps, welcome back to the channel. Today we have a brand new speaking test. So let's begin. So here we have questions about creativity in part 1. Are you a creative person? Yes, definitely. Then there's of course various types of creativity. Like for example, I cannot draw, I cannot paint. I'm not good at that at all. In fact, I still remember when I was in school and we had this painting drawing competition thing. I drew this horrible peacock and I still got the consolation prize, but only because my mom went up to the teacher and was like, "No, my daughter did a good job. You should definitely give her, the prize." So anyway, but otherwise, if you take away the drawing and painting stuff, I really am creative. For example, in terms of writing poetry, I do that and I do it well. It's not like some Instagram poetry or something. I don't want to toot my own horn, but I really am good at that. And otherwise as well, like, when we make projects and stuff at school, I I really pay attention to the aesthetics of everything. I design outfits and clothing. I also create little bits and pieces of music every now and then. So I would say, yeah, I enjoy the process of creation and being inspired. I think it's very important that I have some kind of outlet for my creativity, because if I did not, I would be very frustrated. What did you learn about creativity at school? Oh gosh, I would say school is a great place to kill creativity and murder passion. I'm not in favor of school. I don't have a positive view of it, because that's where you go to learn about rules, regulation, order, and, fitting inside a box. But creativity is outside the box. Creativity cannot be forced into a box, but yet that's what school expects of you. So no, any creativity that I have is, due to my upbringing and of course due to whatever natural gifts I may have. But I will say though, that my English teacher in 11th grade, her name is Suma, and she had been a great influence, because I remember we had this assignment, just a casual fun assignment. We read some kind of, I don't know, a story about a blind person. And she was like, okay, we had like 100 students in class. This was 11th grade, right? So she told us, okay, well, I want all of you to just try, write something, write some kind of poetry or write some kind of short story, something. And, we'll like, announce 3 of the best people. And so I tried to write. I unfortunately don't have the text anymore, but I did write something. I wrote this very emo poetry. And she was like, she told me, wow, this is really good. I think I was number 2 in class. And that was like, that lit this spark. So yeah, you know what they say, there's always a one teacher that, changes everything. So yeah, that's the one that had an impact on me. And I still remember all these years later, I still remember. So she did foster, creativity. But generally, when you think of like school, okay, grades 1 to 10 or so, I don't have, school has not taught me anything about creativity, except that one teacher who was like really, really good. Does anyone in your family have a good imagination? Yeah, in fact, I think maybe I got my creativity from my mother, even though her creativity is different. She's an artist, she likes painting, drawing, and interior design, all that kind of stuff. So, still creative, just a different kind of creativity. She was into fashion design as well and did really well. So that is probably, they say sometimes these kinds of skills are, passed down. So yeah, she definitely has a good imagination, a good eye for things like colors and patterns and things like that as well. I think it probably runs in the family. Who knows? I mean, I don't have any kids yet, so well, I guess we'll see. Are people in your country generally very creative? I would say probably no. Right, because I think most people are just, their primary goal is just to survive. Oh, I've got a job and I've got like, 2 or 3 kids, I've got a wife, etc., and whatever. The responsibilities of daily life don't really allow people to be creative, to be free, to, like, when I think of what I do, I realize I'm very privileged in being able to be creative. You know, that this meme about starving artists, how artists are so unstable. That's kind of true, isn't it? Because, well, to be creative, you need time, you need, well, to create an environment. Most people can't do that. They're thinking, how am I going to survive? How am I going to pay, the mortgage? How am I going to feed my family? And I mean, when you work, like, when you wake up at 7, you go to work, and then you come back home at like 9 p.m., you don't have time. You don't have time to be creative. So, no, most people are not. But then again, the country has produced a lot of really good artists. But generally, I find that to be creative, you need to have some kind of security in life, right? Or some kind of maybe social scaffolding, right? That kind of ensures that you don't go broke and absolutely die hungry or something, which of course doesn't really exist. I wouldn't say that exists here. So of course people are less likely to be risk taking, which of course if you're a creative type of person, you probably are a little bit of a risk taker. But yeah, so I would say no. I mean, people still think inside the box. Thinking outside the box is in fact kind of taboo for a lot of people, So yeah, no, not really. Okay, let's look at part two. Right. Okay, talk about a house that you visited that would be perfect for you. You should say where it was, what it looked like, how you felt when you saw it, and explain why you think this house would be perfect. So that's a very cool question. This could be a house that you've, you know, um seen, like, maybe you were looking to rent a place, maybe you were looking to buy a place, maybe you ended up renting or buying something else ultimately. But I mean, they do say visit it. So, sometimes people would ask, this is actually a question that's been asked before, and I remember one person was asking, oh, can it be a house that I've seen on Zillow or something like that, I've seen online? And I was like, no, because see, it's the keyword here is visited. It has to be a house that you've seen in person. So it can't be a house that you've seen online, unfortunately. Now, house here, of course, can be anything. It can be an actual house. It could even be an apartment. Either is fine. So, and of course, remember, you can always fake info. This doesn't have to be real, right? It can be faked. No one's gonna check. So yeah. Um, so I think it was 10 years ago. So I was still in college and I had this little part-time job for fun because, I would be free by 11, 12. I'd be free by 12 p.m. and I have nothing to do the whole day. So I got a job at a realtor's office, and sometimes we'd go on site visits. So once I went to this place, so the apartments were still under construction, but they had like one sample flat. And so it was like right in the center of town. And I forgot exactly the size and everything, but it was pretty big. It was pretty big. But the best part, I think, was that, they'd really, of course, it was a sample flat. So all the interiors and everything else, that was just for show. But the way that they'd arranged, they'd made use of space. Like they had this grand living room. It was all just the way, for example, they've got a little lobby type thing. So you don't like open the door straight into the living room. So they had a little lobby type thing. Then you have this grand room, and it's got these circular, slightly Victorian type arches. So it was really something from a different world entirely. In fact, right, up my alley, so to speak. And then you've got this huge kitchen with this wonderful island. And the windows were all, like bay windows, and they had this little, so they had a balcony. It was a flat, of course, it was an apartment, so they didn't have like a garden, but they did have a balcony, and so they had all these plants in the balcony. It kind of looked like a mini garden because the balcony was pretty huge. So you had a balcony in every room, and of course you had, I think there were two, maybe three bedrooms, I don't know, because it was a long time ago. But again, they were also like very comfortable. They had these nooks, and the beds were inside the nook, so they were like partially, kind of covered. It was like you were ensconced within that little nook. It was very good placement, and I was surprised because the most apartments that we'd see, they were like a very standard, average apartments. But this one was so different. It was like a different world entirely. And so, and of course, they had these, claw-footed bathtubs, and the bathrooms themselves were pretty huge as well, which is not very common in the city. Of course, it's a very space-starved city, so I at once felt like I was transported to a different world entirely. And I think that's exactly the kind of feeling that you want to have, right? When you walk home, when you walk into your home. after a day of work or something. That's exactly the feeling that you want to have. And I think they did a really good job. I mean, I was impressed, I was convinced, and they really did a good job because, it's a sample apartment, right? Because the whole thing was still under construction for the most part, but then you have a client and you have them come into that sample apartment and think, wow, this is just perfect. So whoever, did that, they did a really good job. And for someone like me who likes, living in the city, I think the location was perfect, the size was perfect as well, and it was in a place that was not noisy at all, which is very difficult to find in this city. And that's exactly why I think it's perfect. It's not huge, it's not a matchbox either, and it's still right in the, smack dab in the city center. Okay, let's talk more about homes. Part 3. Does the cost of housing affect people's choices when it comes to their perfect house? This is a no-brainer. Of course it does. I mean, it's ridiculous how much more expensive housing has become all over the world. And this is exactly why people are even refusing to, start families, because I mean, you need a home, you need a roof over your head. But if, getting, for example, a mortgage is difficult, um, and what's funny is often mortgage payments can be less than rent payments, but of course you need to qualify for a mortgage, and banks won't give you, a good interest rate either. So, somebody might want to have, 2 or 3 bedrooms maybe because they've got kids or whatever, but they might have to settle for a 1 bed or something. And, when you have to make compromises in, the kind of housing or accommodation that you live in, of course, that can have a negative impact on your standard of living. In fact, this is a major problem pretty much anywhere in the world. It's not limited to big cities anymore either. 20 years ago, it used to be the case that that was just a big city thing, but it's not. It's a problem almost everywhere. In fact, it would be rare to find a city where, housing costs are not a problem. Do you think that people from different cultures have the same idea of a perfect house? Not at all. Of course, it's different all over the world. And even within the same culture, you can have people who are urban and you can have people who are more rural or suburban. So, of course, like let's say you live someplace that's very cold, you'll have a different idea of what an ideal home needs to have. Or if you live somewhere that's very warm, right? So you have different needs in terms of structure, insulation, design. So yeah, it goes without saying. But what I find nowadays, if you'll notice, lots of, especially apartments, they don't really have a character anymore. They kind of all look the same. Any apartment in any big city, doesn't matter if it's in South America or in Europe or in Asia or in Hong Kong. Apartments, more or less, they kind of look the same. You can't even tell, like when you're inside the apartment, you can't even tell where you are in the world. And so there's definitely less cultural influence on housing now compared to like 100 or 200 years ago. You think the place where people live can affect their way of life? Well, of course, because every region has its own customs and, traditions and what people enjoy doing, what they don't enjoy doing. So if you live somewhere where you're not a good fit, and again, just being born somewhere doesn't automatically mean that you're a good fit, with the people and the, traditions or cultures around you. So maybe you move somewhere and you realize, oh, I thought this was gonna be a nice place to live in, but I don't like the way people conduct their business here. I don't like the way people behave, or, I don't like how the rules are. For example, in many places, you may have 24/7 stores, right? But in a lot of parts of the world, you don't have, no shops are open on Sundays except for like, really small places. So you have to do all your shopping during the week, maybe on Saturday if it's an option. So it depends on if you can adjust to something like that. There's also, for example, you have for example, you have the concept of Mittagssuche. That's a German concept. So afternoon, there's a certain time where you really can't make loud noises. And of course, after like 10 p.m. or something, like that's legal. And if someone does, disturb your peace, you can call the police. So that, of course, is not a concept that exists everywhere. But, that's just one of the things. It's cultural, it's embedded, and it's, can you deal with that or can you not deal with that? So yeah, that depends. What are the most common types of houses in your country? Well, there's, most people live in apartments. Houses are kind of more of a suburban, not even suburban, they're more of a rural thing. Pretty much anybody though who does live in a more rural area will 100% have a house. Especially people who live, in large families. They have a lot of either they have a lot of children or they live in multi-generational homes. So multi-generational homes are very common. You have like two or so floors, sometimes even three, and usually these tend to be, so it's not like how a lot of houses in, for example, in America or so, they're built out of wood. That's not the case. Houses here are built out of solid concrete. You can't just, there's this meme going around. You know how in movies and etc. You've got like somebody who punches their hand into the wall and the wall breaks. Not like breaks, it's got a hole in it. But that would never happen here. You'd break your arm. You'd break your hand if you ever try that because, it's solid concrete and solid steel. So building standards are actually very good. But that's also partially because, we don't really have bad weather, tornadoes, earthquakes, stuff like that. For the most part, of course, not every single place, but in most cases, we don't really have that issue. So you can build, these kinds of structures. So yeah, it's usually multi-generational living or just standard apartments that look pretty much the same, as you would find anywhere else in the world, really. Because, there's been a lot of change over the past 20 years. So there really is no unique standard except in certain places, like where you have, for example, around the mountains, you have these really nice wooden homes. The interiors are also, they're very warm and welcoming, but in most places we still have the concrete and steel structures that are very standard. There's no, I wouldn't say that I can, make note of any particular differences as such because they pretty much all look the same. Of course, interior design choices can be different, but that's a very personal, thing. I don't think that has much to do with culture. Right, so that was that. If you have any feedback or anything you'd like to point out or anything that you would like me to do or not do, just leave a comment down below and I will definitely implement your suggestions. So until then, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and in case you know someone who's preparing for the IELTS, you can also share the video with them. And I'll see you in a couple days. Why not check out our playlist? We have a lot of videos for speaking and for writing. So yeah, until then, I'll see you next time. Bye.